This is an update on my cancer diagnosis. Today is Friday, the 31st of August, 2018. It has now been 58 days since I first learned I had cancer. It's been 50 days since I began my chemotherapy program at Beth Israel Hospital. I'm now engaged in that. Most of that time has been spent here in hospital. But I got 8 days of freedom where I was allowed out into the outside world. And I really don't like that very much. I don't like the outside world. It's hot, it's humid, and there's a lot of commute time involved. I'm staying down in Marshfield, south of Boston, and it takes me 2 hours to get to the hospital. And then in the hospital, I'm spending 3 to 6 hours receiving fluids, and then there's another 2-hour commute back. So it's just like a real job being an outpatient. So I'd much rather be an inpatient where all the services are brought to me, and basically all my time is my own to spend as I wish. So I'm really having a fantastic time. This sounds so hard to believe. Someone who's suffering from cancer, who might be facing the death penalty here. But this is the greatest, most important experience of my life. It has taught me so much about how life works that I didn't know, and I was ready for it. This is just the thing I needed when I needed it. It is a philosophical challenge, sort of like Area 51 in my 1990s days. This is the new challenge for me: how to make sense of cancer and make sense of these changes in my life. And this has really been a wonderful experience. I can't say how wonderful it's been. It's not really costing me anything, in that insurance is paying for just about everything. There's a high deductible involved, $2,500. I'm also facing some fixed expenses, cell phones and my insurance premium payment, and I am in dire financial straits in those terms, and I've set up a GoFundMe page. I'm switching my GoFundMe page from Glenn's Final Project Fund to Glenn's Final Recovery Fund, because when I first set up the GoFundMe page, I really thought I was going to die. I really thought I was going to have to wrap up all my projects and move on. Now it seems that I'm actually going to live, that there's a good chance I'm actually going to live long and prosper. It's certainly not a sure thing at this point. I'm only about halfway into chemotherapy treatment, but unless things take a turn for the worst, I'm probably going to live and probably going to kick around and still have this wonderful experience to look back on. So I'll tell you a little bit more about the GoFundMe page. At the end of this video, you can also look for the link for it down below. But let me recap my cancer experience so far. I was feeling, in June of this year, I was feeling pretty crappy. I had very low energy. I was traveling in Europe at the time. I was vacationing in Europe, and I really didn't have the energy to leave my bunk. I had also lost my appetite. I had no interest in food, which meant I was losing weight, which seemed like a good thing at the time. And then I got back to the States and resumed my normal job of driving people's cars and pets across the country. And in this case, I was driving an RV from Colorado to California, a small RV, and I was feeling pretty lousy. I was sleeping on a strange schedule, and I was just trying to get to my destination. I remember driving on Interstate 70, putting the car into cruise control mode at 60 miles an hour, and that's the last I remember. The next thing I remember, I'm waking up in an ambulance, and the ambulance attendant said I had blacked out on the highway. So I remember none of that. I am told that they had to break a window to get me out. But since the car was on cruise control, I must have tapped something. I must have done something to bring the car to a stop. And I was not seriously injured. The RV wasn't seriously damaged, but I clearly had a seizure on the highway, which is not a good thing. They took me to a hospital in Grand Junction, Colorado, a very nice hospital, St. Mary's. And there they did some CAT scans the same day, some radiological tests of my head and my chest, and they found all sorts of things that don't belong there. Clearly metastasized cancer throughout my body, my head, my body. There was a large tumor in my brain. Clearly this thing was serious and had progressed to what seemed to be the final stages. I spent 2 days in Colorado. I flew back on my own to Boston. It was a rough journey, but I made it. And then I began looking into outpatient treatment with my regular doctor here in Boston. They eventually took me in during one of my outpatient visits. They realized, your kidneys are failing. We need to get you into the hospital right now. It was transferred to Beth Israel here in the Longwood section of Boston, and I immediately began treatment for what is called large diffuse B-cell lymphoma. And the particular type of lymphoma I have is double hit lymphoma, which is said to have a poor prognosis. Now, so at the time, I was kind of planning for the end. They took MRI images of my brain and found a substantial tumor behind my right eye. So the tumor was so large that my eye was bulging out, and you could physically see that this eye was bulging out. And it looked pretty grim. And I recorded some videos at the time saying, this might be the end. But things went pretty well. The initial chemotherapy treatment very rapidly shrank that tumor. And that tumor within about 3 weeks, became no longer an issue. You could look at the MRI and you could see there was a first MRI taken upon my admission where this whole section of the brain had turned what seemed to be like mush. It looked like, on the MRI image, it looked like a liver pate. Whereas on this side, the left side, you have nice cauliflower definition to the brain. Over on this side, there was no definition to the brain. It was just all smushed up and looked like it was pushing out of its brain sac. But 3 weeks later, they took another MRI, and things were almost back to normal on this right side. And all throughout this, I felt no neurological effects. In other words, I felt that nothing that was me, none of my capacities, nothing of the skills was compromised, even during that tumor period. That somehow this tumor had struck at a place that didn't seem to have much effect. That didn't seem to have much. It's like there being a fire in the shopping mall, and the fire happens to strike only the store that doesn't happen to be occupied. That's what it felt like. So I've come to try to grapple with the fact that I'm suffering from obvious brain damage, but I'm not experiencing anything inside, any differences inside. And I've got to analyzing this and found that that's not completely true. There's a lot of things that have changed in my personality and in my senses. They just don't happen to be the higher level functions that one would expect in this portion of the brain. This portion of the brain is the right temporal lobe, which is mainly used for memory and sensation processing. And the things I was experiencing were loss of appetite, loss of any emotional interest in food. And that's normally associated with a central portion of the brain called the hypothalamus, which was not affected by my brain lesions. And so it seemed kind of odd that this was happening. Another thing that was affected was my circadian rhythm. Since before my diagnosis, about 4 days before my diagnosis, I started having these bizarre sleep patterns, and I can actually track them on my Fitbit, which tracks my Fitbit, which is not there, tracks my sleep patterns. And beginning of June, beginning of July, my sleep patterns were all over the place. I was sleeping at 2 p.m. and then going to sleep again at 8 p.m. And my sleep patterns bore no relation to the setting sun. So this all occurred. This was obviously a result of the tumor. Yet the clock, the actual body clock for telling me when to sleep and wake, again, was located in the hypothalamus, which was not affected by my tumor. So you have these kind of mysterious effects. Another thing I lost was my libido, or any sexual interest in the opposite sex, which is something I can very well live without. But again, these things are not normally associated with the right temporal lobe. They're associated with more of the primitive brain. And I began to put together what was probably happening when I discovered through an incident at the hospital that I had lost my anger, that I had lost my frustration with people and my grudges, and everything that you might associate with anger had vanished. And in fact, it had vanished well before my diagnosis. It was kind of interesting, for example, that I faced this life-threatening news on July 4th that I very well might die. And I took it like it's no big thing. Like, okay, well, this is just something we got to deal with, and we're going to, if we need to shut down the shop, then we're going to shut down the shop and do it in an organized way. But I was so calm about it, and so without fear about it, and so just totally cool with it, that I kind of realized that that's not normal. And, I've always been a cool dude, but not quite that cool. And I think that began to realize that there's something wrong in the way I'm processing emotions, something different at least in the way I'm processing emotions. And I put it all together on July 31st when I had a conflict with a staff member that should have made me livid, should have made me angry. And I realized at that point, I felt no anger toward this staff person, that in fact I felt no anger at all in the past or the present, and that all that anger had gone away. For example, if I were to call up a memory, an unpleasant memory from the past, I'm sure you have them, and you call up this memory and your stomach tightens up and you remember how you mishandled a situation or how someone abused you, and you just feel that anger or shame or a sense of anxiety that comes back when you call that memory up, that kind of accompanies that memory. After my disease, I could call up the memory, but none of that anxiety was there. None of that aggression or that shame was there. That had all been stripped away. And that's when I began to realize that the amygdala was involved. The amygdala is an almond-shaped organ located, embedded within the right temporal lobe, which is right within the zone of my tumor, that regulates emotion in some way. There are two amygdalae. There's one on the left and one on the right, and they have direct connections to the hypothalamus and to the lower regions of the brain. So they're kind of connecting the sensory systems of the brain to the animal systems of the brain. And I realized that this region must have been damaged in some way, and it turns out that it was damaged in a very good way, and that it stripped me of things I didn't need, and the things I didn't need were all the anger in my life, all the angers and fears and things that I didn't. And this is very hard to explain, which is why I have to write a whole book about it. But I've been living a life now without anger for possibly 3 months now, and it's a really good thing. It's a really good thing. It's a really good place to be. I don't recommend that you take my path and have your amygdala damaged, but I've seen the other side now. I've seen what it's like to be without anger, and it's a very good place, because all forms of anger tend to be destructive. If you lash out in anger at someone, or you're motivated in some way by a grudge or a regret, then you're very often taking the wrong path. You're going in the wrong direction in your life. And if you lose your anger, or you can set aside your anger, you are going to be making better decisions. And that's what I find out now, that I have, in effect, I have superpowers to see the world much more clearly than I used to be able to see it, and to act much more strategically than I used to be able to act, because all of this anger has been stripped away from me. And I'm very good now at plotting and planning according to the real world, according to the way the world really is, as opposed to according to the way I want it to be and that I need it to be to suit my anger. So that's the message I need to convey to people is, okay, anger is controlling your life, and I've seen what it's like to be without anger, and maybe I can tell you a little bit about what anger is and how it works, and how to free yourself of it. So this is the subject of my book. The book is called Losing My Amygdala, and I'm working on it now. It's kind of semi-secret. For marketing purposes, I'm not making it public. However, if you were to donate to my GoFundMe page, the new GoFundMe page, I will share it with you. I will share the book as it is, the latest manuscript. You can. So there's a little motivation to join my GoFundMe page. I still have financial needs because I have certain fixed expenses that amount to about roughly $2,000 a month. That even though I have no home I need to pay for, I have no mortgage, I have no dependents, I still need roughly $2,000 a month to survive. I've lost, for the time being, my primary source of income, which was driving cars and pets across the country. As soon as I am able, I will restart that. I'm currently planning on a restart of November 1st, which is, under the most optimistic scenario, is when I will be in remission. It's certainly not a guarantee, but it's realistically possible that by November 1st I will be cancer-free. There's a lot of uncertainties here because my cancer isn't the type that is normally cured very quickly, but things seem to be progressing pretty well. So that's a summary of things so far. I'm very well taken care of in this fine institution. I love being in the hospital. People find that hard to believe. I love being trapped in a hospital room where there's nothing to do but work on my computer. It's the perfect life for me. I wish I could do this for the rest of my life. I'm surrounded by wonderful people, good nurses, and I very much enjoy it. This is the first time in 10 years that I lived continuously in one place. My 38 days in the hospital was the longest continuous stay I've ever had in one place in 10 years. And it has become my home, in effect. And I really enjoy it here. I know they're going to kick me out in about 3 or 4 days. They're going to kick me out back into outpatient treatment. But I certainly enjoy the experience while I'm here. Everything has been wonderful. I've experienced no pain, nothing significant beyond a little headache or a chill or a stomach ache, things that you would normally experience in the real world. That's the only effects I've had from this chemotherapy. And they happen more often. You have got more headaches and more stomach aches because of the chemotherapy. But basically, chemotherapy has been a breeze. It's not this nightmare that you think of. Chemotherapy today can be very targeted. The symptoms can be controlled. And what effectively we're doing is killing off any cells that duplicate, that multiply. So certain cells in your body, for example, brain cells and heart cells and muscle cells and bone cells, they no longer reproduce. They no longer divide. Once you reach adulthood, these cells just stop dividing, and you've got all the cells that you're ever going to get in your life. The things that do keep dividing are like blood cells and hair follicle cells, and of course the cancer itself is dividing. So to kill the cancer, they kill everything that divides, everything that grows and reproduces, and they can do this in a targeted way, targeting the DNA of these cells that reproduce. So what chemotherapy does is it stops these cells from dividing. It prevents the red cells from dividing. So as long as you're killing cancer cells, you're also killing red blood cells and white blood cells that protect you from infection, as well as hair follicles. Now, you notice that I still have my eyebrows, but my eyebrows haven't grown. And you also notice that I'm bare around the head and the chin. That is my normal haircut. I took my normal haircut 4 weeks ago, and my hair has not grown since then. So I should have a full beard by now and a full head of hair by now. I don't, because all of those cells have stopped dividing. So that's what chemotherapy is it takes up your time. It means that I've got to be constantly having tests, but I still get 8 hours a day to work on my computer and work on my book and do things like make this video. So it's a good experience. I will talk more about cancer and what it means and what it does, and talk about people's reactions to my cancer, which are generally dysfunctional. If you tell your family that you have cancer, they're going to freak out. And they freak out in very unusual ways, which I've just begun to identify. When you tell people on the internet that you have cancer, they all send their thoughts and prayers. And these thoughts and prayers really aren't worth very much. I wish I have had a truckload of thoughts and prayers. But the people who give the truckload of thoughts and prayers don't generally give to my GoFundMe page, where they actually might do something. But what I most enjoy are people who engage me. People who go to my Facebook page and comment on my Facebook posts about my cancer, and who can see where I'm really at. And where I'm at is not the despair you would expect. It's not the tragedy of cancer that you would expect. You would find somebody who's really having a grand old time enjoying his cancer and enjoying all the black comedy of what's going on here. So I urge you to check in on my Facebook page, see what's happening. If you're looking at this a year from now, you might be able to even access those those posts by looking at my album called Beth Israel Cancer Treatment on Facebook, and all those posts should be attached to it. And you can look at what sort of things I was posting back then during my cancer years. I generally expect to live. I think there's a very good chance of living. If I die, it's not going to happen quickly, because when one form of treatment fails, you just try another and another until eventually you run out of treatments and you send your patient into hospice, which is the final stage of medical treatment, where you just want to make them comfortable. I'm probably, even in the worst case scenario, I'm probably a year away from that. So in the worst case scenario, I live a year. In the best case scenario, I live however normally I would normally live. And the likelihood of my popping off tomorrow is relatively low. I like to say that my chance of living for the next 6 months is probably better than your chance of living 6 months, because I'm not out there in the real world dealing with traffic and dealing with all the risks of the real world. So I could go on forever, but let me stop it there. You check out my GoFundMe page, which is linked below, and also check out my Facebook page, which is just as meaningful to me. Follow my posts on Facebook, and you'll see what I'm thinking about cancer and thinking about philosophy in general, including anger and all the fascinating philosophical subjects that cancer brings up.